Look at the front porch of almost any house in America today. You will likely see a cardboard box. Whether you bought a $5 gadget on Temu or a cheap phone case from a dropshipper, you just tapped into the most efficient logistical machine in human history. But to understand the terrifying reality of what else is moving through this exact same supply chain, we have to rewind almost 200 years. In the 1830s, the British Empire was desperate to fix a massive trade deficit with China. Their solution wasn't to sell better products, it was to smuggle in thousands of tons of opium. It devastated Chinese society, sparked a brutal war, and triggered what Beijing still bitterly refers to today as the century of humiliation. Fast forward to the present day. The United States has a massive trade deficit with China, but this time the roles are completely reversed. Right now, thousands of unregulated overseas chemical plants are allegedly using the exact same e-commerce logistics networks, dropping off your cheap retail goods, to funnel the lethal precursor ingredients for fentanyl straight into the Americas. Geopolitical experts aren't just calling this a drug crisis. When you look at the history, the sheer scale of the logistics, and the alleged state tax rebates funding it, analysts are calling this a highly calculated reverse opium war. And the chilling part? The West intentionally built the very shipping loopholes allowing it to happen. Look at the sheer volume of global trade today. Every single day, nearly 4 million packages arrive in the United States from overseas. The vast majority of them originate in China. We are living in the golden age of hyper-fast, dirt-cheap retail. You can open an app like Temu or Shein, or browse a Shopify dropshipper and buy a phone case for $3. A few days later, it arrives on your porch. It feels like logistical magic, but it isn't magic. It is a massive, highly exploitable loophole in international trade law, and it is called the de minimis exemption. To understand how a chemical war is being waged through your mail, you have to understand how this loophole works. Under U.S. customs law, specifically Section 321, any single shipment valued at under $800 is allowed to enter the country duty-free. More importantly, because these packages are designated as low value, they bypass the rigorous, heavy inspections required for massive commercial shipping containers. The de minimis rule wasn't designed for e-commerce. It was originally created decades ago to save the government the hassle of taxing tourists bringing back cheap souvenirs from vacation. But in 2016, the U.S. raised the threshold from $200 to $800. They opened the floodgates. Today, over 90% of all cargo entering the United States uses this exact exemption. It is an ocean of cardboard and plastic. Customs and Border Protection is completely overwhelmed. It is mathematically and physically impossible to inspect 4 million individual small packages a day. The system relies entirely on the honor system, trusting that the digital shipping manifest accurately matches what is inside the box. And that is exactly where the trap snaps shut. While millions of Americans use this loophole to buy cheap clothing, Mexican cartels and unregulated Chinese chemical plants realized it is the absolute perfect smuggling pipeline. Why risk shipping a multi-million-dollar shipping container full of illegal narcotics that might get seized at the port when you can just break it down into thousands of small, uninspected boxes valued at under $800? A bombshell 2024 investigation by the U.S. House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party revealed exactly how brazen this has become. Investigators scraped data from the Chinese internet and found thousands of unregulated chemical companies openly selling the exact precursor ingredients needed to synthesize fentanyl. These aren't hidden dark web drug lords. They operate on the open internet. And on their websites, these companies explicitly advertise a guaranteed customs bypass. How do they guarantee it? By deliberately mislabeling the chemical precursors as dog food, motor oil, or basic cosmetics, and slipping them right into the massive, chaotic river of de minimis e-commerce packages. But it gets much worse. The 2024 congressional report uncovered persuasive evidence that the Chinese government is allegedly subsidizing this exact trade. Investigators found a government website revealing that Beijing provides export tax rebates, direct financial subsidies to companies producing specific fentanyl precursors on the strict condition that those chemicals are sold outside of China. These drugs and chemicals have almost no legal industrial use worldwide. They are heavily regulated or banned internationally. Yet, according to the report, companies exporting them receive a state-sponsored financial reward for pushing them across the Pacific. And they use the exact same logistics network as the world's biggest e-commerce giants to do it. Sometimes they ship directly to American buyers. Other times they use a tactic experts call the Tijuana two-step. They ship the raw chemicals duty-free into Mexico, where cartel superlabs synthesize the finished fentanyl, press it into counterfeit pills, and smuggle it across the southern border. The West thought they were just building a frictionless supply chain to get cheaper consumer goods. They wanted faster shipping and lower prices. Instead, they built a massive, unmonitorable backdoor directly into their own country, and now adversarial networks are using that exact backdoor to wage an asymmetrical chemical war. But the logistics networks are only half of the equation. To truly understand how Beijing maintains a chokehold on this market, we have to look at the factories themselves. If the e-commerce shipping routes are the delivery mechanism, we have to look at where the ammunition is actually coming from. When most people think about the global drug trade, they imagine hidden jungle laboratories or underground cartel bunkers. But the fentanyl precursor pipeline doesn't look like a cartel operation. It looks like a completely standard, sterile corporate supply chain. Right now, there is a sprawling cottage industry of thousands of small, independent chemical manufacturing plants scattered across China. They are heavily concentrated in major industrial hubs like Wuhan. To the naked eye, they are just producing standard commercial chemicals, ingredients for plastics, pharmaceuticals, or agricultural pesticides. But behind closed doors, they are churning out the specific, highly lethal chemical building blocks required to synthesize synthetic opioids. To understand how this operates so openly, you have to understand the massive contradiction at the heart of the Chinese state. The Chinese Communist Party runs the most advanced techno-totalitarian surveillance apparatus in human history. They monitor digital transactions, track citizens through facial recognition, and heavily police the domestic internet. Yet somehow, thousands of chemical companies are able to openly advertise fentanyl precursors on the clear web, across social media platforms, and on international business-to-business websites. How does the most surveilled country on Earth simply miss a multi-billion-dollar shadow industry operating right under its nose? The answer is a terrifying mix of regulatory loopholes and alleged state-sponsored neglect. When the United States applies immense diplomatic pressure on Beijing to ban a specific chemical, the Chinese government often complies. In 2019, they officially scheduled fentanyl and several of its direct precursors as controlled substances. But the factories didn't shut down. They just played a lethal game of chemical whack-a-mole. Because fentanyl is completely synthetic, the manufacturing methods are practically limitless. The moment a specific precursor is banned, Chinese chemists simply tweak a single molecule in the formula. Instantly, they create a brand new designer precursor, or a dual-use chemical that isn't on any banned list. By the time Western regulators identify the new chemical, draft the legislation, and convince Beijing to ban it, a year has passed, and the chemists have already moved on to the next molecular variation. But it goes far beyond a lack of regulation. According to the 2024 investigative report released by the U.S. House Select Committee on the CCP, the Chinese government isn't just looking the other way, they are actively funding it. The congressional investigation uncovered PRC government documents revealing that Beijing directly subsidizes the manufacturing of these illicit chemicals through value-added tax rebates. Let that sink in. The Chinese government provides a direct financial reward, a tax rebate, to companies producing highly regulated, deadly fentanyl precursors. But there is a catch. To get the money, the chemicals must be exported. They cannot be sold inside China. The committee's report noted that these specific substances have virtually no known legal industrial use anywhere in the world. Many are banned by UN treaties, yet companies exporting them receive a state-sponsored financial reward for pushing them across the Pacific. And they operate with terrifying corporate efficiency. Undercover operations by U.S. law enforcement have found that sales representatives for these Chinese chemical companies offer tailored customer service. If a cartel buyer in Mexico needs to evade a new customs check, the Chinese supplier will suggest alternative chemicals. They sell the precursors in massive 25-kilogram fiber drums, boasting that a single drum can yield up to 10 million lethal pills. To guarantee delivery, they use the e-commerce loophole we talked about in Chapter 1. They disguise the chemicals as furniture parts, makeup, or motor oil, print a standard commercial shipping label, and drop it into the massive, chaotic ocean of daily international mail. This isn't just a rogue criminal enterprise. When you combine the state tax rebates, the open internet advertising, and the abuse of international trade laws, it looks exactly like an asymmetrical economic weapon. And waiting on the other side of the Pacific to receive that weapon is the most violent, heavily armed distribution network on the planet. If you follow the supply chain across the Pacific, past the e-commerce loopholes and out of the Chinese shadow factories, the chemicals eventually land in the hands of the most ruthless distribution network on Earth, the Mexican cartels, specifically the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel. But the cartels didn't invent this crisis. They are simply the militarized delivery men for a much larger global chemical operation. To understand why the cartels largely abandoned traditional agriculture-based drugs to embrace synthetic opioids, you just have to look at the terrifying economics. Fentanyl is entirely synthetic. It doesn't require sunlight, rain, or massive fields of poppies that can be spotted by government satellites or destroyed by military crop dusters. All it requires is a clandestine laboratory, a few basic cooking methods, and a steady supply of Chinese precursors. And the profit margins are staggering. According to intelligence reports, a cartel can purchase just $800 worth of precursor chemicals from a Chinese supplier. Once synthesized, that single batch can yield over 400,000 fentanyl pills. Sold on American streets, that initial $800 investment turns into millions of dollars in pure profit. Because the drug is up to 50 times stronger than heroin, the cartel started lacing it into everything: counterfeit prescription pills, cocaine, even stimulants. It created a highly addictive, hyper-lethal product that requires incredibly small, easily concealable volumes to traffic. But while the cartels count their cash, the United States is bleeding out. This is where the geopolitical reality of the reverse opium war becomes impossible to ignore. Look at the sheer scale of the damage being inflicted on the American homeland. Over the last few years, the United States has lost hundreds of thousands of citizens to synthetic opioid overdoses. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 49. But the devastation goes far beyond the tragic loss of human life. This is a massive structural drain on the foundation of the American economy. The U.S. government estimated that in 2020 alone, the opioid epidemic cost the country nearly $1.5 trillion. That was roughly 7% of the entire national GDP. It drains the healthcare system, overwhelms local law enforcement, shrinks the labor force, and hollows out entire communities. The United States is pouring billions of dollars into border security, drug treatment, and narco enforcement, desperately trying to treat the symptoms of the disease. But the source of the disease remains almost completely untouched. When Washington pressures Beijing to crack down on the shadow factories, the Chinese government routinely deflects. They publicly reject co-responsibility. They claim that fentanyl is an American domestic problem, driven by a cultural appetite for prescription drugs. They tell the U.S. to secure its own southern border and police its own citizens. Yet, at the exact same time, U.S. congressional investigators allege that Beijing continues to offer state-sponsored tax rebates to the very companies exporting these lethal chemicals. The Chinese Communist Party maintains the strictest internet censorship and domestic surveillance grid in human history, yet somehow allows thousands of these chemical vendors to operate freely on the open web. Whether it is a calculated, deliberate act of state-sponsored warfare, or simply a highly profitable strategy of malign neglect, the geopolitical result is exactly the same. The United States is being structurally weakened from the inside out. Almost 200 years ago, during the original Opium Wars, Western empires deliberately flooded the Qing Dynasty with a highly addictive narcotic to reverse a trade deficit. It shattered Chinese society, drained their economy, and forced a proud empire to its knees. Today, the trade deficit is reversed, and the history books are repeating themselves with terrifying precision. The West thought they were just building a highly efficient global supply chain to buy cheap retail goods. They thought they could outsource their manufacturing and rely on adversarial nations without consequence. Instead, they built the exact delivery mechanism for their own destabilization. They funded the factories, they opened the customs loopholes, and they left the front door wide open. The reverse opium war isn't a future threat. It is already here. Let me know what you think of this conclusion. Do you think the U.S. government will ever be able to close the minimis loophole, or is the e-commerce machine too big to stop? Drop your exact thoughts in the comments down below, because I read every single one. If you want the unvarnished truth behind global geopolitics and the shadow wars shaping our future, hit the subscribe button. I'll see you in the next deep dive.